Mechanisms of disease lecture. Mechanisms of disease lecture and pathogenic organisms. So this lecture will cover the various terminology regarding disease processes and pathogenic organisms. Studying disease terminology. So we have health, which is the physical, mental, and local well-being, not merely being absent of disease. Disease happens when homeostasis is not maintained. Homeostasis is the body's continuous ability to respond to changes in the environment and maintain consistency in the internal environment. Etiology is the study of the factors that cause the disease. And acute and chronic are also terms referred to throughout this course. Acute meaning sudden onset, which persists shortly. An example of an acute disease would be an ear infection. And then a chronic disease develops slowly and lasts a longer period of time, or perhaps lifetime. An example of this would be arthritis. A lot of times the chronic diseases are not reversible, however some are. The study of disease, some more disease terminology. We have idiopathic, which means we don't know what causes the disease. Oftentimes, and within this course, you will see etiology unknown. That's what idiopathic means, is the unknown. Iatrogenic means an illness is caused by a procedure or a treatment. And then we also have the terms sign and symptoms. Very important to differentiate the two. Signs are the objective abnormalities associated with the disease. Oftentimes we consider signs the observable parts, meaning change in blood pressure, change in temperature, change in pulse or respirations, things that are measurable. Symptoms are subjective abnormalities associated with the disease. So we think of symptoms as what's reported by the patient. Some examples are nausea and pain. Some other terminology, we have syndromes, which is a group of signs or symptoms that occur together. And pathogenesis is the pattern of diseases, of a disease in which it is developed. Some more terminology for diseases. Prognosis is the outcome of the disease. Exacerbation is the increase or flare-up of symptoms or disease. A good example of this would be shingles. It will be in remission and then it will flare up, and the flare-up would be called exacerbation. And a lot of times there's a cause to that, maybe stress. Remission is no signs or symptoms of the disease. We often talk about cancer is in remission. And then communicable diseases, a disease is transmitted from one person to another. There are different patterns of disease. Epidemiology is the study or the occurrence, the distribution, and transmission of diseases in the human population. Endemics are diseases that are native to a local region. Oftentimes we think of influenza or influenza outbreak can be an endemic disease. Epidemics occur when diseases affect many people at the same time. This is more on a regional level. Some examples are the Zika virus, swine flu, yellow fever, and way back an epidemic was the bubonic plague. Pandemics are more on a global or widespread basis. And we think of pandemics, some examples would be HIV or AIDS. Influenza can also be an epidemic or a pandemic. So influenza is one of those that can be all three. Patterns of disease, it's important in discovering the cause of the disease, but sometimes it's difficult and many factors can affect the disease transmission. Diseases can be fought through prevention and treatment, so good hand washing and flu vaccinations. Pathophysiology, the mechanisms of disease. Pathophysiology is the study of underlying physiological aspects of a disease. Genetic mechanisms, infectious mechanisms such as pathogenic organisms or particles, neoplastic mechanisms such as tumors or cancers. Not all tumors are cancer. And traumatic mechanisms such as physical or chemical agents, such as a broken leg from a car accident. Pathophysiology, mechanisms of disease, so metabolic mechanisms we can also have, which are endocrine imbalances or malnutrition. Inflammatory mechanisms, which can consist of autoimmunity, where the body attacks itself. Some examples are rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and scleroderma. There are also many more. Inflammation, due to maybe an infection of some sort or an invasion of a foreign body. Degeneration, which can also be malnutrition. Some examples are rickets, goiters, and anemia. Some pathophysiology risk factors, so genetic factors can affect people, age, lifestyle, stress, environmental factors, and pre-existing conditions, so other diseases or things that may have happened in the lifetime. Pathogenic organisms, so pathogenic organisms are disease-causing organisms. Normal flora are normal bacteria, viruses. Typically viruses aren't normal, but there are normal bacteria that help the body maintain homeostasis. Viruses are microscopic intracellular parasites that consist of nucleic acid cores with protein coats. They invade host cells and pirate organelles and raw materials. They are classified by shape, nucleic acid type, and the method of reproduction. A lot of times reproduction is done by the takeover of a cell's DNA or RNA, and they need that in order to survive. Prions are a pathogenic protein molecule. They convert normal proteins to abnormal proteins, causing abnormal function that produce disease. It may be passed on to offspring. Some examples are mad cow disease and brain degenerative diseases, such as bovine spongiformis encephalopathy, which causes a fatal degeneration in brain tissue and progressive loss of nervous system function. Bacteria are tiny cells without a nucleus. They excrete toxins, parasitize host cells, and form colonies. They are classified based on their growth requirements, either aerobic or anaerobic. Aerobic meaning they require oxygen, and anaerobic meaning they don't require oxygen in order to survive. Some examples of some bacteria that are common in healthcare are MRSA, VRE, or vancomycin resistant enterococci, or strep infections. Bacteria are also classified based on their staining properties, which depends on the composition of the cell wall. Gram-positive usually are purple in color when looked at under a microscope, and gram-negative are usually pink to reddish color when looking under a microscope. Bacteria are also classified by their shape and size. Bacilli are rod-shaped type bacteria. Cocci are round cells. There's also curved or spiral rods. And then there's also a really small type of bacteria that has a obligate parasite type shape. There are also spores, which are non-reproducing forms of bacteria that resist unfavorable environmental conditions, meaning that they may survive after a surface is disinfected. Fungi are simple organisms similar to plants but lack chlorophyll. So we have yeasts, which are small single-cell fungi. We have molds, which are large multicellular fungi. And then we have mycotic infections, which often resist treatment. Some examples of fungi infections are athlete's foot, ringworm, and yeast infections. Protozoa are large one-celled organisms that have organized nucleus. They may infest human fluids and parasitize or destroy cells. Some examples are Giardia and Trichomonas. Major groups of protozoa, we have amoebas, which possess a pseudopodia, which is a false foot. Flagellates, which possess flagella, which is a whip-like extension in order to be mobile. Or the ciliates, which possess cilia, which are short hair-like extensions that help the organism be mobile. Sporozoa enter the cell during one phase of a two-part phase of their cycle. They are born by vectors or transmitters, and then during the other phase. Vectors are organisms that spread disease to others. There are oftentimes pathogenic animals, so to speak. They are large, complex, multicellular organisms. They parasitize or otherwise damage human tissue or organs. Some examples are nematodes, which are roundworms. Platyhemus, which are flatworms or flukes. And then arthropods, which are often vectors of disease, which are parasitic mites, ticks, fleas, lice, biting or stinging bees, mosquitoes, spiders, anything that basically bites. Mechanisms of transmission. So person-to-person contact, which is considered a communicable disease, can be prevented by education and can also be prevented by using aseptic techniques, which we will talk about in a little bit. Environmental contact can be prevented by avoiding contact and can be prevented by safe sanitization practices. Our environmental contact is considered our food source, our water sources, things that we may digest or inhale. Mechanisms of transmission, so opportunistic invasions, which change the body's environment, can be prevented by avoiding changes in the skin or mucosal membranes, can be prevented by cleansing of wounds. Transmission by vectors can be prevented by reducing the population of vectors or reducing contact with vectors. This might be wearing long sleeves or wearing repellent, those sorts of things. Other prevention and treatment strategies, vaccines that stimulate immunity. Vaccines can be dead or attenuated pathogens that stimulate the immunity. Some vaccinations require multiple inoculations in order to be effective. Chemicals destroy or inhibit pathogens. Some examples are antibiotics. We have antibiotics that are natural compounds, and then we have some that are more synthetic. Most antibiotics are natural and compounds. Examples are amoxicillin, And then there are some synthetic compounds that are non-antibiotics that help treat pathogenic microorganism invasion, such as acyclovir, which may be used for a viral infection. Antibiotics are only used for bacterial infections. And then other ways to prevent infection would be disinfection, which we mainly talk about disinfection of surfaces, sterilization, which means we're killing off all microorganisms. A lot of times we think of sterilization of instruments that we're using in the healthcare setting. Sanitization, we think of washing of instruments or washing of hands. Although sterilization kills off all microorganisms, sanitization and disinfection only kills some microorganisms. So we will always have some of those microorganisms present, whether they're normal flora or pathogenic. Neoplasms are abnormal growth of cells. We have benign tumors, which usually remain localized, malignant tumors, which spread and form secondary tumors, and then metastasis, where a cell leaves the primary tumor and starts a secondary tumor in a new location. Some different classes of tumors. So we have benign epithelial tumors. A papilloma is a finger-like projection. Adenoma is a gland-type tumor, and a nevus is a small pigmented tumor. Benign connective tissue tumors are lipomas or fat tumors, osteomas, which are bone tumors, and chondomas are cartilage-type tumors. Usually benign tumors are encapsulated and usually are very slow growing. Tumors that are cancerous. Malignant tumors often are called cancers. Classifications of tumors, we have carcinomas, which are malignant epithelial tumors. We have two types. We have melanoma, which involves the melanocytes, and the adenocarcinomas, which are the glandular type cancers. We also have sarcomas, which are very malignant. They are of connective tissue, and examples of these are lymphomas or lymphatic cancer, osteosarcomas, which are bone cancer, myelomas, which are bone marrow tumors, and fibrosarcomas, which are cancers of the fibrous tissue. Causes of cancers. Really, we don't clearly understand what the causes of cancers are. Cancer is a type of neoplasm that involves uncontrolled cell division. There are several different types of different cell abnormalities. We have hypoplasia, which means there are fewer cells there. Hyperplasia, which means there's a lot more cells. A lot of times we think of like a callus as a hyperplasia. Sometimes hyperplasias can be due to hormonal imbalances or hormonal stimulation. Neoplasia, which is similar to hyperplasia, but there's an abnormal multiplication due to the loss of normal proliferation. So the cell nucleuses are very different and they're very staggered. They're not as organized as the hyperplasia. Dysplasia is the change in the shape of the cells. Metaphasia is the size typically becomes changed, and then anaphasia is the loss of structure of that cell, the outside of the cell, and functional differentiation of the normal cell. And usually these are characterized as cancerous tumors. Causes of cancers. So there are many different types of causes. There's genetic factors, such as cancer genes, and a good example is the breast cancer gene, BRCA1 and BRCA2. Carcinogens, such as smoking or benzenes. Age, leukemia is more prominent in younger people, colon cancer in older people. Environment, sunlight can cause cancers, skin cancers, and viruses such as HPV. Signs of cancer: abnormal bleeding, abnormal mass that hasn't been there before. Methods of detecting cancer can be self-examination, diagnostic imaging such as CT scans, MRIs, ultrasound. Sometimes we'll do biopsies, for example, a pap smear, or blood tests, which include a complete blood count with white blood cell differentiation. Medical images. Here are some medical images you can take a look at for tumors. This is a mammogram. A picture is a mammogram with a carcinoma of the breast. B is a CT scan, which has a tumor in the left hemisphere of the brain, showed here. C is an MRI of the brain, which shows the left hemisphere with a tumor. And then we have a sonogram of the abdomen that shows a tumor in the abdomen. Tumors and cancers, so there's staging, which classifies tumors by size and extent of spread. Grading assesses the likelihood of the pattern of the tumor and how it develops. And cataxia is a syndrome including loss of appetite, loss of weight, and general weakness, which is normally comes along with cancers and their treatment. Causes of death by cancer are usually secondary infections, organ failure, hemorrhage, and sometimes there's undetermined factors why people die. Cancer treatments, so we have surgery, chemotherapy such as Taxol for breast cancer, radiation therapies, laser therapies, immunotherapies, and there are some new strategies with rational drugs that target molecules and enzymes and receptors, but a lot of those are still under research. Inflammation or inflammatory response. The signs of the inflammatory response are redness, heat, swelling, and pain. Swelling can also be referred to as edema, and redness can be referred to as erythema. Inflammation mediators, we have histamine, prostaglandins, and kinins. Some causes of blood vessels to dilate, increase blood volume, and which gives us the effect of the redness and the heat. And then white blood cells can travel quickly to the injury site, sometimes called chemotaxis. The inflammatory response to mechanical injury. So here we have a splinter that damaged the tissue and carries bacteria to the body. The blood vessels then dilate and begin leaking fluids. They cause swelling and redness, and the white blood cells are attracted to the injury site and begin to consume the bacteria and damage tissue cells. A fibrous capsule ends up around the injury site to prevent injury to the surrounding tissue. Sometimes when there are a lot of white blood cells and dead bacterial cells and damaged tissue at the site of the infection, you will see a white purulent type mucus that comes out, and this is called pus. Inflammation, typically all words with inflammation end in itis. The inflammatory diseases, we have local and systemic. Systemic meaning body-wide, local meaning just a portion of the finger or the arm, very localized to one spot in the body. Fever is oftentimes due to our body response, is a high body temperature caused by a resetting of the body's hemostat, or thermostat I should say, and destroys pathogens and enhances immunity. Chronic inflammation can constitute a disease itself because it causes damage to tissues. Acute inflammation is usually immediate protective and minimizes the damage of tissues.